For 11 years, he lived two lives. By day, he was a KGB officer, one of the Soviet Union's most loyal servants. He served in Denmark, in England, in Moscow. He received promotions. He earned trust. By night, he was an MI6 agent, Britain's eyes inside the Kremlin. He leaked Soviet plans, agent names, operational details. Oleg Gordievsky was the Cold War's most dangerous double agent. Every day he lived with the fear of capture. Every phone call, every doorbell, every unexpected summons could mean death. The KGB showed no mercy to traitors. But Gordievsky continued, because he did not believe in the Soviet system. He had seen the invasion of Prague. He had seen the lies. He had seen the oppression. Spying for the West was not treason against his country. It was the command of his conscience. 11 years, hundreds of secret documents, thousands of intelligence reports, and finally, the inevitable end: betrayal. But it was not the Soviets who exposed Gordievsky. It was the Americans. This is the story of the most valuable spy Britain ever had inside the Soviet Union. How he survived for over a decade, how he changed the course of the Cold War, and how he escaped from Moscow in the trunk of a car. Oleg Antonovich Gordievsky was born in 1938 in Moscow. His family was deeply embedded in the Soviet system. His father was a KGB officer. His older brother followed the same path. Young Oleg was expected to serve the state as they did. He joined the KGB in 1963, assigned to foreign intelligence. He was bright, capable, and ideologically reliable, or so his superiors believed. Gordievsky's first foreign posting was Copenhagen, Denmark, in 1966. He worked under diplomatic cover at the Soviet embassy, gathering intelligence on NATO and Danish politics. It was in Denmark that the cracks began to form. Gordievsky experienced Western society for the first time. He saw freedom of speech, freedom of movement, freedom of thought. He compared it to the stifling atmosphere of the Soviet Union. The contrast was stark. But the breaking point came in August 1968. Soviet tanks rolled into Czechoslovakia, crushing the Prague Spring. Gordievsky watched in horror as his country destroyed a peaceful movement for reform. He made a decision. The Soviet system was not something he could defend. It was something that needed to be opposed. The approach came in 1974. Gordievsky had returned to Copenhagen for a second tour. MI6, British intelligence, had been watching him. They sensed his disillusionment. They decided to make contact. The recruitment was delicate. A wrong move could expose the operation and cost Gordievsky his life. MI6 officers approached him carefully, testing his reactions, gauging his willingness. Gordievsky was receptive. He had been waiting for this. He wanted to act against the system he had come to despise. The British offered him the opportunity. The agreement was simple. Gordievsky would continue his KGB career as normal. He would report everything he learned to MI6. In return, the British would protect him as best they could, and eventually help him escape if necessary. From that moment, Oleg Gordievsky became a double agent. Every document that crossed his desk, every conversation he overheard, every plan he learned about would be shared with London. The most dangerous game had begun. Living as a double agent required extraordinary discipline. Gordievsky had to be the perfect KGB officer. Any suspicion, any hint of disloyalty, would trigger an investigation. The KGB's internal security was ruthless. Traitors were discovered and eliminated. He memorized documents rather than copying them when possible. When he did photograph materials, he used equipment provided by MI6, designed to leave no trace. He met his handlers in carefully planned locations, using elaborate counter-surveillance techniques. The stress was immense. Every interaction with colleagues could be a test. Every question could be a trap. Gordievsky learned to control his expressions, his voice, his body language. He became an actor playing the most important role of his life. His marriage suffered. He could not tell his wife Layla what he was doing. She believed he was a loyal Soviet officer. The secret created distance between them that could never be bridged. But the intelligence he provided was invaluable. Gordievsky gave MI6 insight into KGB operations across Europe. He identified Soviet agents. He revealed recruitment techniques and targets. He exposed the inner workings of Soviet intelligence. Year after year, the information flowed, and year after year, Gordievsky survived. The KGB rewarded Gordievsky's apparent loyalty with promotions. In 1982, he received his most important assignment. He was posted to London as a senior officer in the KGB Rezidentura, the Soviet intelligence station operating from the embassy. This was exactly where MI6 wanted him. London was the center of British intelligence. Having their agent inside the Soviet embassy was an extraordinary advantage. Gordievsky could provide real-time intelligence on KGB operations in Britain. He could identify which British citizens the Soviets were targeting for recruitment. He could warn of planned operations before they happened. In 1985, Gordievsky was promoted to resident, the top KGB position in London. He was now the head of Soviet intelligence operations in Britain, and he was working for the British. The irony was exquisite. The KGB's chief spy in London was actually a British agent. Every operation he supervised, every report he filed, every decision he made was shaped by a secret loyalty to MI6. Gordievsky had reached the pinnacle of his double career. November 1983. NATO launched Exercise Able Archer. It was a command post exercise simulating a nuclear war with the Soviet Union. On paper, it was routine. NATO conducted similar exercises regularly, but this time was different. The exercise was unusually realistic. It simulated the escalation from conventional to nuclear warfare. It involved senior officials, including heads of government in some scenarios. The communications used formats that closely resembled actual war orders. Soviet intelligence was watching, and they were terrified. The KGB had been warning for years that the West was planning a first strike against the Soviet Union. The leadership in Moscow, increasingly paranoid under the aging Politburo, was convinced that NATO might use an exercise as cover for a real attack. As Able Archer progressed, Soviet forces went on alert. Nuclear-armed aircraft in Eastern Europe were prepared for immediate launch. The situation was far more dangerous than anyone in the West realized. Gordievsky saw the panic in the messages from Moscow. He understood that the Soviet leadership genuinely believed war might be imminent. This was not propaganda. This was real fear. He reported everything to MI6. The British were shocked. They had no idea the Soviets were this paranoid. The intelligence was passed to Washington. President Reagan was stunned. He had thought his tough rhetoric was strengthening deterrence. Instead, it was pushing the Soviets toward a preemptive strike. Reagan began softening his language and pursuing dialogue. Gordievsky's intelligence may have prevented a catastrophic miscalculation. In May 1985, everything changed. Gordievsky was summoned to Moscow for what he was told were routine consultations. He had no reason to suspect anything was wrong. He had been operating successfully for 11 years. But when he arrived, the atmosphere was different. His colleagues were cold. Conversations stopped when he entered rooms. Something was wrong. Then came the interrogation. KGB officers questioned him for hours. They drugged him with truth serum. They accused him of being a British spy. They knew. They did not have proof, but they knew. Gordievsky denied everything. He maintained his composure despite the drugs and the pressure. The interrogators were frustrated. They could not break him. They could not get a confession. But they were certain of his guilt. They placed him under surveillance. They restricted his movements. They were building a case. It was only a matter of time before he would be arrested, tried, and executed. How had they discovered him? The answer was Aldrich Ames. Aldrich Ames was a CIA officer assigned to Soviet counterintelligence. His job was to identify and recruit Soviet agents. Instead, he became one himself. Ames was greedy and resentful. He needed money to support an expensive lifestyle and a demanding wife. In April 1985, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington and offered his services. The KGB paid him $50,000 for his first delivery. Over the next 9 years, they would pay him over $4 million. In return, Ames gave them everything. He revealed the identities of every Soviet citizen spying for the United States and its allies. Dozens of names. Gordievsky's was among the first. The consequences were devastating. At least 10 agents were executed. Many more were imprisoned. An entire generation of Western intelligence assets inside the Soviet Union was wiped out. Ames was not caught until 1994. By then, the damage was irreparable. He was sentenced to life in prison, where he remains today. Gordievsky survived only because MI6 acted fast enough to extract him before the KGB could complete its case. MI6 had always planned for the worst. From the beginning of Gordievsky's recruitment, they had prepared an escape route. It was called Operation Pimlico. If their agent was ever in danger, they would get him out. In July 1985, Gordievsky triggered the emergency signal. The plan required him to appear at a specific location in Moscow at a specific time, carrying a Safeway shopping bag and eating a Mars chocolate bar. These were the recognition signals that would tell MI6 officers he needed extraction. Gordievsky followed the protocol. MI6 confirmed receipt of his signal. 3 weeks later, on July 19th, the escape was executed. Gordievsky slipped away from his KGB surveillance on a weekend when security was lighter. He made his way to a forested area near the Finnish border, where British diplomatic vehicles were waiting. The plan was audacious. Gordievsky would hide in the trunk of a car driven by MI6 officers traveling under diplomatic cover. They would drive through the Soviet border checkpoint into Finland. If discovered, it would cause a major international incident. If Gordievsky was found, he would be executed. The vehicles approached the border. Soviet guards inspected them. Dogs sniffed around the cars. Inside the trunk, Gordievsky lay motionless, covered in a thermal blanket to mask his heat signature. The MI6 officers had prepared a secret weapon: dirty diapers. When the dog showed interest in the trunk, one of the British women traveling in the convoy changed her baby's diaper nearby. The powerful smell drove the dogs away. The guards waved the vehicles through. Gordievsky crossed into Finland. He was free. The successful extraction was a triumph for MI6 and a humiliation for the KGB. Gordievsky was brought to Britain, where he was debriefed extensively. The intelligence he provided during these sessions was extraordinary. He revealed details of Soviet operations that would take years to fully analyze. He was given a new identity and settled in England. The British government granted him citizenship. He lived quietly, writing books and occasionally consulting on intelligence matters. But his escape came at a personal cost. His wife Layla and their 2 daughters remained in the Soviet Union. The KGB would not let them leave. For 6 years, Gordievsky was separated from his family. Only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 were they finally allowed to join him. The marriage did not survive. Layla had not known about his double life. The revelation destroyed whatever remained of their relationship. They divorced, though Gordievsky maintained contact with his daughters. The Soviet Union tried Gordievsky in absentia and sentenced him to death. The sentence was never carried out, but for years he lived with security concerns. Former KGB officers do not forget traitors. Oleg Gordievsky's contribution to Western intelligence is difficult to overstate. He provided MI6 with unprecedented insight into KGB operations during the most dangerous period of the Cold War. His intelligence helped identify Soviet agents across Europe. It revealed Soviet strategic thinking at the highest levels. It may have prevented nuclear war during the Able Archer crisis. Margaret Thatcher called him the most valuable intelligence asset Britain had during the Cold War. She met with him personally after his escape and ensured he received full support from the British government. Gordievsky also contributed to understanding how the Cold War ended. His reports showed that the Soviet leadership was far more insecure and paranoid than the West realized. This understanding helped shape the approach of Western leaders in the final years of the conflict. After his escape, Gordievsky became an author and lecturer. He wrote several books about his experiences and about Soviet intelligence. His memoir, co-written with journalist Christopher Andrew, remains one of the most important primary sources on KGB operations. He was awarded the Companion of the Most Distinguished Order of St. Michael and St. George by the British government, one of the highest honors given to non-citizens. Oleg Gordievsky is now in his 80s, living quietly in England. He survived an assassination attempt in 2007 when he was poisoned with thallium. He recovered after months of hospitalization. The attack was never officially attributed, but suspicions pointed toward Russian intelligence. His story raises profound questions about loyalty, conscience, and courage. Was Gordievsky a traitor or a hero? To the Soviet Union, he was the worst kind of criminal. A man who betrayed his country, his colleagues, his oath. A man whose information sent fellow KGB officers to their deaths. To the West, he was a man of extraordinary courage. Someone who risked everything to oppose a system he believed was evil. Someone whose intelligence saved lives and possibly prevented nuclear war. Gordievsky himself has no doubts. He believes he served a higher cause than national loyalty. He saw the Soviet system for what it was and chose to fight it from within. 11 years of double life, constant fear, separation from family, an escape that read like fiction, and a legacy that helped shape the final chapter of the Cold War. The KGB officer who became Britain's greatest spy. Oleg Gordievsky lived 2 lives, and in doing so, he may have saved millions of others.